Dyscalculia. You know, I think I might actually have this. I'm not sure. It's mathematics disorder. 1925, Dr. Henschen, Henschchen, coined the term acalculia to describe acquired deficits in arithmetic. And they found several different areas associated with brain lesions. Specifically, the aphasic subtype is associated with left perisylvan lesions. The spatial subtype is associated with right hemisphere lesions. Planning and perseveration subtype is associated with frontal lesions. And so those are the three main areas for dyscalculia or acalculia. The definition from the DSM-4 is a substantial discrepancy between a child's performance on individually administered tests of math skills and what's expected in a child of similar age, intelligence, and education. It must also be a functional impairment. So just because I can't do math, it doesn't impair on my life, it doesn't infringe. I did marry someone who could do math for me, and so I don't necessarily have the disorder. Yeah, it's true. 3 to 6.5% of the population with, you know, men win again. Oh, wait, no, 1 to 1 on this one. With a comorbid mental retardation, learning impairment, language impairment and reading disorders, and also ADHD. Very little research has been done on mathematics disorders. The diagnosis for mathematics disorder really does require the academic achievement testing. It does. But achievement tests must also include many different aspects. So you have to have the math comprehension, actually being able to do the math problems, problem solving, and then you have to do some real close observation of the way the person solves math problems. It might be really understanding their strategy for doing the math problems and understanding math facts. Newest research is showing that there's a link between language acquisition and dyslexia. So I want to go back really quickly for that. The study from MIT, this is out of MIT, is that people with and without dyslexia listen to recorded voice pairs with cartoon avatars and computer screens. The subjects try to match the voice to the correct avatar speaking English and then an unfamiliar language such as Mandarin for people who don't actually speak Mandarin. People with dyslexia are able to do so only half of the time, whether the language is spoken in English or Mandarin. And this is why people with dyslexia often misspeak. So this is actually, this is just something that I added last week to this, and that's why it's out of order. So it's one of the newest things that's out there, really looking at language acquisition and dyslexia. There's a link now. All right. So the risk factors for learning disabilities. So different risk factors for learning disabilities in general: pregnancy and birth complications, cigarette smoking, evidence of fetal distress. These are all in utero, by the way, mother's cigarette smoking, not necessarily your own. Maternal alcohol or drug use, premature low birth weight. That's why I always ask, were you born premature or on time? Were you born early or on time? By how much? Were you little? How much did you weigh? Oftentimes they say, I don't know, but my mom really bragged that she got to put me in doll clothes. That's interesting. That's good to know. Or I fit in the palm of her hand. Good to know.
What's considered premature?
You know what? Premature isn't necessarily as bad as low birth weight, but the pregnant lady could probably help us out.
Low birth weight's under 5.
Under 5 pounds.
Yeah, and so full term you're 40 weeks, but it's I think it's considered full term at 37 weeks.
Right. So you could be born a few weeks premature. It's really the focus is on birth weight. So if you are 6 pounds, 8 ounces, or God forbid 10 pounds like my husband, and you were born a few weeks early, that's fine, you know, as long as you're big enough. So early illnesses and injuries and increased lead levels. Other causes of learning disability and intellectual disability. Several studies suggest there's a genetic link and also utero exposure with FAS being the most common. We talked a little bit about that. Low socioeconomic status and poor access to resources. Now, I'm not saying that people with low SES automatically have LD. That's not what I'm saying. Throwing that out there now. What I'm saying is that oftentimes people in lower socioeconomic situations have single parent who's working, and they're not necessarily left with a nanny. You know, they might not have the best of early childhood upbringing in regard to preschool. Oftentimes they're left with large groups of children in a child care setting, and they don't get one-on-one attention, and they don't get that stimulation. So if you have a 6-month-old in a rocker in front of Jerry Springer for 3 years, that's not going to be as good as someone who is held and touched and read to and given those same a different experience. Right. That's why I bring up low SES as a contributor, possible contributor. Not necessarily all. Also, childhood abuse, trauma, and neglect, which we talked to in the beginning, and poor attachment. There are some fantastic studies out there, and I don't have them here because I took them out, that are really good for looking at attachment with regard to ADHD. And I took them out because I figured ADHD is another bear unto itself. But attachment, they're showing that children with poor attachment are showing the exact same neurological deficits as children with ADHD. Specifically, both of them have orbitofrontal problems. You know, their cortexes look the same, and they're both having problems with attention. They both have problems with concentration. Right? That's 3 small areas. So it may be that the early attachment can also contribute to learning disability, not necessarily intellectual disability, but learning disabilities. Now, what about diagnosing learning disabilities? Well, there's 2 main ways of diagnosing learning disabilities. So it's a traditional evaluation or response to intervention model. The traditional evaluation is the detection of learning disabilities for ability and achievement problems. Traditional means that you identify a child with learning disabilities through this discrepancy model. It's looking at ability and achievement, which is achievement test scores versus IQ scores. The critics of this say that this model doesn't allow for early intervention or identification. Another criticism is the universal definition or formula for identifying these is off. It says that you know, it's too broad. For children with learning disabilities, a proponent claimed that there are other ways of identifying early on instead of the wait to fail way. So usually through the traditional method, they weren't referred for testing until they were already failing. This is one of the ability achievement discrepancy often fails to identify people who are just low achievers, who, you know, might show up with a huge discrepancy, but maybe there's another reason why. Maybe instead of focusing on schoolwork, they have to go, you know, just go to work as soon as they get out so that they can put bread on the table for their little brothers and sisters. Maybe they're being beaten up at home every night, and so their mind's not necessarily on their schoolwork. Their mind is on what's going to happen to them when they get home. On the protocol itself, it has the discrepancy formula. So you can actually look at either GAI or FSIQ or VCI. So it allows you to use any of those three to really look at them. Now, I'm not a proponent of using VCI, namely because there might be English language learners or other problems that are to be taken into account. But then if the full scale IQ isn't a good measure of their overall abilities, the GAI would be good. Unless the GAI isn't a good measure of their overall, it's a really good thing. Also, you can send in your Wyatt and you can send in your WACE, and the Pearson's group will put it together for a small fee and send you a report that shows the discrepancy and how that comes together. A lot of people argue that a discrepancy isn't statistically significant, or if it is statistically significant, isn't necessarily clinically significant. In my case, not clinically significant. And the biggest argument against this is the over-identification of minority students. So, this is the newest, response to intervention. The response to intervention is a new model. It has been adopted in 12 states, though the majority of states still rely on the achievement ability discrepancy with a little bit more added in so that they don't get caught up with the idea problems. And this response to intervention is a 3-tiered method that really starts in the classroom. It's wrought with problems too, don't get me wrong. It's really designed to function as a one part of a data-based process. It's a process as opposed to a test. The RTI isn't a test, it's a process. It's developed by proponents of an alternative means of identifying learning disability in children. And it can be used at a group or individual level, hence the fact that it's used in classrooms. And its proponents say that it's bringing more clarity to the specific learning disability population. Opponents, however, claim that it does not identify specific learning disabilities so much as low achievement students. So that's another argument against both of them. There's no model out there that really looks at low achievers versus people with specific learning disabilities. Another criticism is that it's suggesting the means for limiting access to special education. Is California an RTI state? There are 12 states. I only found that there are 12 states that have adopted it, but I couldn't find which ones, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. So the RTI doesn't actually replace the need for a comprehensive evaluation, and current thought for most states is to include both. To include an RTI type of method where you have different tiers. You have the in-class functioning. You have people being able to talk about things on a teamwork setting. You have both the educators and the parents working together for an individualized treatment plan, and you are able to pull it all together